women in history I'd never heard of and wouldn't be surprised if you haven't either. Today, let's talk about Henrietta Hetty Green. Hetty Green was born in 1834 and passed in 1916. She was a brilliant financier and one of the pioneers of value investing. You know, buy low, sell high. She made John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan look like dabblers at best. Yeah, that Rockefeller and that Morgan. And she was in the Guinness Book of World Records. Among other names, she was known as the Queen of Wall Street, sometimes the Wizard of Wall Street. But depending on who you talked to, her nicknames were not always quite so flattering. But why, Mary? Well, for Hetty, it all began when she was born to a wealthy Quaker family in New Bedford, Massachusetts. They had made their fortune in whaling, unaliving whales and taking their oil and other resources, because clearly the whales did not need that. Anyway, her grandfather was apparently a really great businessman, and she was sent to live with him and her Aunt Sylvia when she was about 2 years old. At his knee, she learned the ins and outs of trading, investing, and saving money. Her Quaker upbringing meant she learned to live simply, without excess or frivolous spending. But it was the Gilded Age, and being frugal when you had money was definitely frowned upon. Oh, and her aunt and the other women in her life, all they cared about was finding her a husband. Because of course. So anyway, back to Grandpa. By age 10, Hetty was reading stock quotations and commerce reports to him. In return, she learned his business methods. Turns out her dad was also really good with money. And since her mom was always sick, she spent most of her time with her dad. With him, she went to counting houses, storerooms, commodities traders, and stockbrokers. And about learning to live simply, well, that was by example. See, according to one story, her dad once turned down an expensive cigar. His reasoning? Well, he smoked 40-cent cigars. And why the fuck should he ruin his taste for frugality? Anyway, at 13, Hetty was the bookkeeper for the family's business. And oh my gosh, she was so problematic for her entire life. No, seriously. I mean, she was unapologetic for her defiance of society. Because no matter how old she was, she didn't care what she was supposed to do. She didn't care about relationships or societal norms. She didn't care about her appearance. And she despised primping. Think early 20th century Kardashians. Hey, you gotta look good for the little people, so they know what they're missing out on. Well, and appeal to a future husband, of course. That she didn't care about marriage really got under her aunt's and her mom's skin. They wanted her to find a husband. She wanted them to shut the fuck up and let her earn unlimited financial freedom. Guess who won? Yeah. Anyway, sources said that when she was 20 years old, her grandpa bought her an entire closet of fine clothing, which she sold and then used the money to invest. That same year, her family finally wore her down. So she went to New York City with $1,200 in her pocket, about $42,000 today, to find a husband, of course. Oh, sure, she hung out in high society. But instead of dating, she eavesdropped on men who were discussing the gossip of Wall Street. That was damned easy, too. You want to know why? You want to know why? You want to know why? She was a woman. And how could a widow woman understand man talk? Anyway, so she was supposed to stay in New York for several months, but she came back really early. Pissed off her mom and aunt. But her dad was impressed. She'd only used about $200 of that money, about $7,100 today, and invested the rest successfully. Within a few years of that, her dad left the whaling business. He'd predicted that whale oil was not going to be a thing forever. Turns out his precognition was spot on. So he switched it up, and for 6 years, Hetty split her time between New York and New Bedford. In New York, she was successfully running her dad's business and investing his money. In New Bedford, she was, quote, pestering her aunt to be made a beneficiary to her will. It's going to matter in a minute. Here's the thing, though. Despite all that success, nobody in the fucking family thought she could handle running the business by herself. Because she was a woman. Anyway, inheritance. Hetty's mom had also come from a wealthy family. When she passed away, Hetty thought she'd finally found the capital to be able to build her own fortune. Well, of mom's $100,000 estate, about $3.5 million today, Hetty's dad got almost all of it. Hetty got about $8,000, about $283,000 today. As you can imagine, that stung a bit. Along the way, Hetty did get married to a guy she was actually interested in. He was a millionaire in his own right, but her dad insisted on a prenup. Remember that precognition? That prenup stated No husband would ever be entitled to Hetty's fortune. Dad loved her and her brilliance with money. But again, nobody in the family trusted her to be able to run the business. So when he passed away, he left her an inheritance that he put into a trust and instructed that Hetty was not to have access to the principal, only the interest, stunting her ability to grow that money. So back to Auntie. When she passed away, Hetty found that once again she had been denied anything of substance as an inheritance. And again, the pittance she was given was placed in a trust. But Hetty took it to court. That was a decision that actually haunted her for the rest of her life. She pointed out there had been an addendum to the will, naming her sole beneficiary. But there was a problem. In 1867, a judge ruled that Hetty had forged it. So she and her then hubby headed off to London so she wouldn't get indicted. She gave birth to 2 kids there. And she proved again why her family was fucking dumb. Because see, in just the first year, her profits alone exceeded $1.25 million, or about $27 million today. But her husband. Yeah, so he may have been a millionaire on paper, but he was shit with money. So much so that Hetty ended up having to bail him out no less than twice. One of those times, it cost her $700,000, about $17 million today. She never did forgive him. But she sure was grateful for that prenup. Anyway, 1873, they were back in the States, and she was raking in that money hand over fist, and made her own prediction. Money with nothing to back it up would be a disaster. And in 1907, she proved that she had inherited her father's precognition. It's called the Panic of 1907. Can't imagine why. Anyway, in a brief nutshell, it was the first worldwide financial crisis of the 20th century. Only the Great Depression was worse. So far. That led to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System. Trust companies and banks were failing. People panicked. They wanted their fucking money, which wasn't backed up with anything other than paper, and not the green kind. Hetty did not panic. She had a load of safe investments, real estate, railroads, and low-interest money lending. So in 1907, just like with her husband, Hetty bailed out the men. Wall Street, New York City. She saved an entire economic system when banks couldn't. She was so good at investing that she was the only woman invited to J.P. Morgan's roundtable meeting of financial experts. But I don't recall ever hearing her name. Why might that be? So by then, she was the queen of Wall Street, but the male-dominated press. They focused on her appearance and frugality. For example, they said she only ever wore one black dress. Her maids were to wash only the dirtiest parts to save money on soap. There's more, but come the fuck on. She denied herself expensive medical care, like when she had a hernia. Instead of getting it fixed, she had a stick, and she'd shove that swelling back in. The worst accusation they made, however, was when they claimed that she refused to obtain medical treatment for her son, who ultimately needed his leg amputated. Evidence, however, does show she spared no expense to help him. But hey, that doesn't sell newspapers. She was a secret philanthropist. She believed in discreet charity. She didn't take business partners because, quote, she wouldn't risk someone else's future. Of course, she wasn't flawless. It was that pesky forged will. And among other things, she never owned her own office, only rented. Possibly for ease of movement to avoid paying taxes. Oh, and remember the Guinness Book of World Records? Yeah, that was because they called her the greatest miser of all times. Because she refused extravagance when the time period was literally gilded. But according to an interview, she was honoring her upbringing as a Quaker. Heaven fucking forbid. At the time of her passing, her net worth was estimated at $200 million, or just shy of $6 billion today. That made her the richest woman in the U.S., and arguably in the world. Hetty Green suffered a massive stroke and passed away in her son's home. Oh, but the press! They made even her passing a mockery. They said the stroke happened because she was arguing with a maid over the virtue of skimmed milk, and was so pissed it made her pop an aneurysm. Okay, yeah, Hetty Green was no saint, but she did commit the sin of doing what so many men couldn't. So they gave her another nickname, probably the most popular one because, of course, they called her the Witch of Wall Street.